Bitcoin is close to becoming worthless.
Let's go. Now, what's the Bitcoin?
Bitcoin's like rat poison.
Yeah. Oh,
The greatest scam in history.
let's get it.
Bitcoin will go to fucking zero.
Yeah.
Alright, you ungovernable misfits. I'm your host, Max. Everybody knows that Bitcoin is useless, worthless, and doomed to fail. But what if everyone's wrong? What if it's the system that is doomed to fail? Join me as I speak to some of the brightest people in the space and slither to the deepest, darkest depths of the Bitcoin rabbit hole.
Welcome back, everyone. Today's guest is Zach Herbert, the CEO and co-founder of Foundation Devices. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while now. I really like the look of their new product. It's not available for sale yet. It will be soon, and as soon as it is out, I will be doing a review, so look out for that. I had a great conversation. I really hope you enjoy listening. Before we dive in, I just want to say thanks again to Coinfloor UK for continuing to sponsor the show. And if you haven't checked them out yet, click on the link in the show notes. You'll get a discount on your auto buys. Stack those sats and get them off exchange. Enjoy. Zach, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, Max, can you hear me?
Yeah, all good. I was just having some problems with my internet, so I was just checking that I was coming through okay.
No problem. I was too. So I just turned off my VPN and it seems to have fixed it.
Okay, great. Isn't it amazing? All this technical stuff and we can't even get internet working.
Exactly. And if you want to, then you have to turn off all those great privacy features.
Exactly right. Well, thank you very much for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I've been admiring Foundation Devices stuff from afar for a while now, and it seems like it's getting closer to a reality and closer to something that is orderable. So I thought, right, I need to reach out to you and learn some more. So yeah, I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Before we sort of dive in and get too technical with anything, it'd be really interesting for me to hear how this all came about and why you've decided to make this device, what sort of spurred you on to do it, and how you entered the Bitcoin space and what have you done before, so we have a bit of a background to the company and why you do what you do.
Yeah. Sure. What I can do is I can give like a higher level overview and then drill more into why we decided to start with Passport, our Bitcoin hardware wallet. But yeah, so I've been into Bitcoin since end of 2013. I was really into Tesla, and putting all my money into that. And then when I was in college, I found out from a friend about Bitcoin, and I just went really down the rabbit hole and got pretty obsessed. Initially, I was obsessed, I think, over the idea of just building a more efficient financial system, about replacing the need for intermediaries. But over the last few years, I've become much more on like the freedom, open source, libertarian type angle about how important Bitcoin is to, really replace this entire monetary system that just is not working properly today. And so, just listening to all the different Bitcoin podcasts like Stefan Livera, Tales from the Crypt, and so on, I think I really went down that rabbit hole. So I knew I wanted to work in the Bitcoin space, but I studied mechanical engineering in college, and I had a job in like software product management afterwards, and I did a little bit of dabbling. I actually was buying and selling hardware wallets on if you remember Open Bazaar, which just actually shut down permanently this year, which is kind of sad. Even though it had kind of gone downhill, I think in terms of use. But I had my HODL hardware shop, and I was, buying and selling Trezors, ledgers. I think I had some Keep keys, and then also Open Dimes because that was before Cold Card came out. And so I was trying to, just be involved in the space. and just be able to learn more about these products and just do a little bit as like a noob. And then I actually ended up taking a job at a local Boston-based company called Nebulous, which was making some, cryptocurrency blockchain stuff. So it was making Saya, which was a decentralized cloud storage network, and then was also just launching Obelisk to make ASIC miners for Saya Coin and for another cryptocurrency called Decred. And so I joined up as one of their first employees and really ended up spending the majority of my time on the hardware side, on managing this crazy crowdfunded project where we actually crowdfunded over $26 million of ASIC mining hardware, a year before we even gave like an estimated ship date. And so even though I had studied hardware in school, it was really a 2-year practical, course on how to build hardware. And, did everything from working with the electrical engineering teams, the mechanical teams, building up the supply chain. We actually did all the manufacturing in the US in the New England area. And we ultimately shipped over 12,000 ASIC miners. And it was a really cool project. It was kind of crazy. But, I and a few of my team members, one, were itching to be founders because we were employees at the company. We were not actually, founders. We didn't have like founders equity or anything like that. And then two, I really want to be in Bitcoin. I thought, all the altcoin stuff, it just felt like gambling and it didn't really feel like it had much meaning. And even though I was doing that for work, I was spending all my time on Bitcoin Twitter and learning more about Bitcoin. And so, I had been using all these hardware wallets previously. I'd been selling them previously. And I just didn't think that there was a product that could reach any kind of mass adoption. And so we just started talking, for months about if we were to do a hardware wallet, what would we do? What would we do differently from the existing companies? And, how would we go about building it? And, if we were to start a company, what would that company stand for? So we ultimately decided in April of 2020 to launch Foundation Devices. And, our goal really is to build the open source hardware foundation for Bitcoin and a sovereign internet. And so things like open source, sovereignty, privacy, user freedom are incredibly important to us. And we decided to start with this first product, which is a Bitcoin hardware wallet called Passport. It's air gapped. It uses QR codes. It's more premium than the existing offerings. I know we can dive into that more on this recording. And I think the only other thing I would add is that I was always like crazy obsessed with Apple. My first job out of high school was at the Apple store. I remember working the iPhone 4 launch and had a lot of great memories working there. And I've just been so disappointed with the trajectory that Apple and Google and all of these kind of like, big tech companies have taken in terms of censorship lately. And I've been, writing and speaking about what Apple's been doing for some time now with, closing down the App Store and restricting what users can do on their devices. And I feel like it's just getting worse and worse every month. And we had a crazy week the last week. And so maybe we can talk about that too. But that's definitely one of the reasons why we wanted to start this company, because we think that, hardware should be basically like a blank canvas that software developers use in order to get their software to people. We don't want to be telling users what they can do on their hardware. And I think that's just unfortunately not the paradigm today. And we're hoping that we can slowly fix that.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that actually in regard to the Apple products. So I'm also, or was also, a massive Apple fanboy. Like I got the first iPod. I've had every iPhone. My first computer I bought with my own money was a Mac, and everything's been Mac. And I'm also sick to death of them. I'm talking to you now through a Mac, and I am looking to change. And yeah, because the reason is, and I've said probably for the last year, maybe year and a half, I keep saying, Jesus, I need to move away from Apple. They're not what I'm preaching about. They do not fit with what we're talking about for Bitcoin. I'm pissed off with the way that they're treating their customers, and this whole walled garden stuff is not correct. But they make the nicest hardware by far. Like, every time I look at something that isn't Apple, it feels less high quality, it looks less high quality, the design isn't as nice, and it's so difficult to step away from that when you're used to it. Everything just feels plasticky and shit, basically, compared to it. So
Yes.
I've been saying for ages, like, why can't there be someone who just comes in, they build the hardware exactly like Apple do, or as good as you can quality, and then you can run Linux on it, or you can run your own stuff on it, and it's not there yet. So it sounds like that is the approach you are taking for foundation devices, and the way that you're looking at your design is like, why not build something as nice and actually have it so that you can have something self-sovereign and you don't have this walled garden.
Exactly. And, we're starting with the hardware wallet, but we're pretty aspirational as a company. And we hope that we can work our way up to smartphones, and computers and more down the line. And, I think the reason, maybe there's a lot of reasons, but I'd say one of the biggest reasons why we have not seen an Apple like entrant in, for example, the Linux space, is because if you think about it, Linux targets a very specific user. I feel like there's two kind of broad categories of users, and let me know if you think differently. But I think like one category is developers, and they're using Linux machines for software development. Sometimes it's a second computer that's dedicated to that. They may be running, something like a Mac as their primary computer. Sometimes it's for work, or sometimes they're dual booting. And it's because, as they're building their software, they need a development environment that's stable. And so maybe they're using, like an Ubuntu long-term release, right? And that's actually what we do for Passport firmware. We all are running the same Ubuntu release because we all want to make sure that we're on the same exact environment. Then I think there's the other category that's kind of like the more paranoid, security conscious user, more of like the, like the cypherpunks. And they run, all different types of Linux distros. And I would argue that both of those user bases don't really have a need to have, a higher quality, really beautifully designed hardware, because they just need it for the functional purposes, and they might not value that primarily. They also probably don't need something that is beautifully integrated with the hardware and software like what Apple does, because it's not really meant for mass market consumption. These devices are meant for, or these operating systems are meant for, very specific user base. I would argue that all of this changes with Bitcoin, because, with Bitcoin being open source and with Bitcoin transactions being immutable, the need for trusting your hardware, trusting your operating system becomes much more important, to the point that I think, maybe 5 years from now, as, Bitcoin goes through another couple bull cycles, I think that there's going to be just a natural need and demand for more trustable open hardware. And then that gives a company like us an opening to actually make the hardware, beautiful and integrated, and try to copy those principles that Apple uses, because now maybe people will actually buy it. And I would argue, right now, if we were to go make a beautiful Linux laptop or something that was just like MacBook in quality, I think we'd probably sell like a nice amount of them, but I feel like it would be in the thousands of units. And unfortunately, that's not enough in terms of revenue to make that type of product.
Yeah, and it's economies of scale, and you need to have enough people buying these things. But I agree with you, with Bitcoin doing what it's inevitably going to do, you are going to have more and more people coming on board and actually thinking about their privacy, because I do think it's almost like Bitcoin somehow works like a bit of a guide and a teacher, and teaches you about all sorts of things that you otherwise wouldn't have known, or at least it has been for me. And so, coming into the space, like most people, it was like, yeah, I just want to make some money. And then it teaches you about, well, none of your data is secure. You should care about your privacy. Here's why. And you start to learn these things, and it's things that you otherwise wouldn't have thought about. So as we have these waves and people do see their purchasing power increase, and they start to learn about self-sovereignty and learn about why open source is important, I think more and more people will switch across. Because right now, people outside of Bitcoin, if I said to them, oh, there's this other device and it's like Apple, but you can run Linux on it, and they're like, well, I'll just buy an Apple then. And you say, well, it's not so good for your privacy and you can't do what you want. And they're just like, I don't care. They don't see the need for it yet, but they will. So I very much hope that you do get to a stage where you can build these, because I'll buy one for sure.
I hope so too. And I think also people have a really hard time relating to and understanding this stuff when it does not directly apply to them. But look what's happened in just the last week or so. I mean, we've seen, all of the big tech companies, banning the president of the United States from their platforms. We've seen Apple and Google remove the Parler app from their app stores. And look, like, politics aside, whether you're conservative, whether you're liberal, whether you're libertarian, whether you support Trump or not, whether you think Parler is awful or not, or the people on Parler, are awful or not, like, none of that matters in terms of the precedent that's being set right now. And so I think a lot of people, thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands or millions of people, are seeing this and saying, oh man, they just removed my app that I'm on every day with maybe, a day's notice. And as that happens more and more frequently, as apps are removed, as YouTube accounts are removed, as prominent accounts of people that you follow are deleted, I think people start to kind of understand at a deeper level why this matters. And, the trajectory that we're on right now is kind of scary in terms of the censorship. And so I feel like Bitcoin almost could not have come at a better time, and could not have been going more mainstream at a better time. And I really, really hope that people, start to care more about free speech and decentralization and sovereignty and those kinds of principles. Because right now, obviously the majority still don't. But when we think about starting a company, we think about, what's the decade-long trend look like? And so that's kind of what we're betting on.
And like you say, betting on a trend long term, I think it's very reasonable to assume that more and more people will care. And with all of what's going on, and you're right, it's really fucking scary. It's proper 1984 stuff. It's deplatforming. It's stopping free speech. It's really not good. And then you sort of layer on top stopping people actually having freedom of movement. I mean, here in the UK with all this corona stuff going on, people are getting arrested for sitting on a park bench because someone's grassed them up because they're supposed to only go out once a day. We weren't allowed to go and see our families for Christmas and all this sort. I did it because I don't give a fuck, and I'm going to live how I want to live because I think it's disgusting that they even suggest that they're going to try and control people's movements. But then I have to make sure that nobody knows who my real identity is, because if I said that, someone will probably come and arrest me. So it's this weird proper 1984 stuff that's happening all around us. And I think that more and more people are starting to twig. They are starting to question, hang on a minute, how free really am I? And when you layer Bitcoin into that and they realize, oh, well, in the future, maybe I don't actually need this bank account that they might ban if I don't wear a mask, or I don't need to be in this walled garden with Apple. I can actually use open source software, and having it accessible through good hardware and good software, which is just getting better all the time. And looking through everyone says they want to produce hardware that looks like Apple, who doesn't? But I'm looking through your website and it's really fucking nice.
Thank you.
It doesn't look like any of the other hardware wallets that I've seen. I always thought that other than the fact that they're shit, the ledgers always to me were like the most simple, nice design that I'd seen, but they're still not very nice. And if you compare it to what I'm seeing here, obviously I haven't had one in my hands, I haven't felt it, but it looks really nice. And I can see that this would fit in with someone's swanky apartment or whatever they want. And if they have all the Apple devices and stuff, they're not going to hold this and go, oh, this looks a bit shitty and tacky. They're going to actually think, this is a really nice, high quality product. And I can see obviously the pricing is quite different to the other manufacturers that are out there, but there's a reason for that. So it's nice to see.
Yeah, thank you. I think, one of our company principles and values is that Bitcoin is already difficult enough for a new user to learn about. So when you have to learn about Bitcoin, but then also learn how to use your hardware wallet, it's like that to me, it's not even like a double. It's like a exponential type effect. It's like, oh man, if I want to get started on Bitcoin, I have to learn how to use this, ledger device, and I have to learn how to enter my 8-digit PIN with 2 buttons. Like those kinds of things are design decisions that just drive me crazy. and so we wanted to make a device that was just like, look, it looks nice. It's premium. It feels right at home with your other premium electronic devices. It's a little bit bulkier because we make some interesting design decisions around the keypad and the screen and using, AAA batteries, for example. So it's a little bit larger than what you would necessarily expect. But you don't have to learn how to use it. You pick it up, you know which button turns it on. You know how to navigate through it. You know how to go through all the settings. It makes it really easy to create a new wallet or import your seed, pair it with a software wallet and just get started. And so that's how we think about it. It's like if we do our jobs correctly, then the device should just feel kind of boring because you shouldn't have to even think about it.
Yeah, it is a massive learning curve, for non-technical people, myself included. It's been, I quit my job and I've done nothing else for 2 years other than just learn about Bitcoin and be obsessed and be a complete loser because I genuinely believe this is going to change the world. And I'm so confident on it that nothing else matters. Nothing else on the planet matters to me because it's not as important. If this works, and I think it will, it's going to bring freedom to the world, and it would never happen without it. We cannot do it without this. It all stems down to the money. And I feel that when I'm trying to express to people how, not only how important it is, but like why they've got to sit and spend, 10, 15, 20 hours to learn how to properly use their hardware wallet and then set up a node and do this and do that. People just don't have the time. Like, even if they say, okay, I'm going to invest in it, I get your theories on why this is going to increase in value, or, I kind of think that it's important that I do have some privacy. They get to a point, there's a barrier where they're like, no, I'm going to leave it on exchange. I'm not going to be messing around with this because it's too hard. And like, I don't have the time and it's too fiddly. And what if I lose my money? And I try and teach them maybe to use a cold card or to set up a node. And they're just like, I'm scared of it. It's too much. So I think for us to really get the average person involved, the user experience, and like, people will get really pissed off with me for saying this, but
I know, why is this controversial?
yeah, but it's true. And like, I do it because I care enough, but not everyone else is going to. And it is important that user experience is up there and close to or as easy to use as their smartphone or whatever other devices they're using, because otherwise you're not going to onboard these people. And people will say, oh, well, they don't fucking deserve, they don't deserve freedom money then. It's like, no, they do. Everyone deserves to have freedom money. This is why it's been built. This is why we're doing what we're doing, is so that everyone can have freedom and be able to store their value and not be fucked by governments and not be fucked by banks. And to say, oh, just because they're not technical enough, why? If someone's a mechanic and they spend all their time working as a mechanic and then they come home, why do they have to spend 10 hours a night for however many months just to be able to use a node and a hardware wallet? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when I think about like what responsibility we have as a hardware producer in terms of, good design, like I think of making choices on behalf of the user in order to guide them through what we think is the proper experience, especially from a security perspective. So, a great example of that is if we know that an air gapped hardware wallet is more secure than plugging into USB or using Bluetooth, which I think, definitely yes, then we should not put USB or Bluetooth on the device. Things like that, because, we want to constrain what the user can do with the hardware so that we know if the user is, using our hardware, they are already making what we think are, good security decisions. We are okay taking the Apple like philosophy of removing features or removing elements. For example, Passport actually does not have a duress pin or a brick me pin, which is popular on Cold
Right.
Card and some other wallets. Because we look at it and we say, look, if you want that, buy a Cold Card. I personally use Cold Cards. They're fantastic for power users. But if a normal user gets confused between their brick me pin and their normal pin and then enters it in by mistake, they've just, wiped their device and completely bricked it. And so those are just a couple examples of things where, we're much more interested in thinking about, how do we design an experience that gives the security of the best products in the space, but removes a lot of the honestly the choice for users so that you can feel comfortable recommending this to, someone who's newer to Bitcoin, and where they won't be scared to use the device. And using QR codes as well is just so much faster and so much, I think, less scary and just less intimidating than passing around an SD card, because it takes seconds. You see what's happening. You line up the camera with the viewfinder on the screen, which is something that people are already used to doing. And so I think it's really important, like giving newer Bitcoiners more familiarity and comfort with the experience, as opposed to having to make them learn, tons of new terms, whole new interfaces, new ways of interacting with the device itself. Because as I mentioned before, it's like there's so much you have to learn. So why would we throw all these choices at newer users? And I know like the harder core response to that is often, as you alluded to before, UX doesn't matter. You just have to educate them. And I don't think that is what's going to happen. I think we have a kind of a binary path ahead of us. It's either we're making the user experience much more friendly and making the smart decisions on behalf of the users so that they can really quickly get themselves up with a hardware wallet, a node, and other types of products like that, multi-sig storage and so on, or they're all going to go on Coinbase. And I think that, like, to me, that's how I see it. Like, those are the two options. You either have this top 0.1% of Bitcoiners holding their own coins and everyone else on custodians, or you figure out over the next, really honestly, in this bull cycle, like in this halving cycle, you figure out, how do we make the experience accessible to the noobs? Otherwise, I'm not sure we're going to be able to, pull them into this more sovereign experience down the line as companies like Coinbase continue to grow and get even more entrenched.
Yeah, and it's a big problem. We very much want people to be taking control of their own funds, and we want to be able to make sure that people don't have Coinbase or don't have these sort of exchanges holding their coins. And there is this sort of middle ground. There is this big gap where, so like from personal experience, the people I've managed to get involved, I would say the majority still will hold it on exchange, no matter how much I badger them, no matter how much I tell them that it's important to take it off, because they just find it too confusing. And then the few that actually have taken their coins off exchange, one is using a cold card, and I've had to spend a lot of time with them messing around and just making them comfortable and sending them guides. And even then, they still get a little bit worried at times. And then the others are using Ledger and their horrible Ledger Live software without their own node and
Right.
all that sort of stuff. And like, to me, it is better, but it's not that much better because you're still leaking loads of privacy. They've had all these leaks and hacks and all this bullshit that's gone on. And I'm like, I don't really want to be sending them to Ledger, but I know they're going to struggle with the cold card. So to have something in between would be very nice.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know, maybe this is a minority view. I guess like the team at Casa shares this view around this seed phrases and the problems with seed phrases, because you think about a new user, you say, okay, you're going to have, here's this hardware wallet. This hardware wallet is, your personal security device. You keep this device safe. This device stores your Bitcoin private key. And then when you're ready to spend your Bitcoin, you have to somehow, connect to this hardware wallet or pass information to this hardware wallet. And then it can sign the transaction. I use the term approve the transaction because a lot of the times people don't understand, what signing means. So I say this device, you enter a few keys, it approves the transaction for you. Then you can send the transaction from your software wallet of choice. So I kind of describe it as almost like a little, like like a bank vault that you get to hold on to, and you can use it to approve things with. But then at the same time, you're saying, okay, the first thing you do when you get this device is you write down these 24 words and keep these words safe. And if someone finds these words, then they're going to have full access to your Bitcoin. So I think there's a huge misunderstanding for a sizable number of users. I would argue it's probably a majority. But if you actually look at how these Ledger phishing attacks have been successful, and I've had some fun clicking through the URLs and going through the whole process just to see how they're trying to trick users, it all comes down to tricking them to enter in their 24-word seed on a computer. And I just feel like we're so early if that's what's happening right now. Like when you pair a new iPhone to your iCloud account, it's obviously generating a bunch of keys on the device and using that to pair up with iCloud. You're not having to write those keys down. Could you imagine if you said, okay, you write these keys down on paper when you have your new iPhone? Like, I just feel like we're so early in this, and I think that just the entire UX flow is just so challenging for a new user, because on one hand, you're telling them this device that's PIN protected is storing your funds or storing your keys. And then on the other hand, you're telling them, write these words down on paper and put them in a drawer somewhere. Like, I can see why that would be so confusing to someone who's new to Bitcoin.
It is. And I remember the feeling when I was doing it, because I've only been involved for, 3 years or so. I remember doing that and shitting myself writing them down, like genuinely, like the fear, because I just went all in. I was just like, I love this. I'm it. And I was so scared because I was saying to the person who was teaching me, I was like, so, but what if one of these is wrong? He's like, you lose everything. I'm like, and what if I lose this? You lose everything. And what if I then send this to this long string of numbers and letters and it's one's wrong? You lose everything. And I'm like, okay. And so it's interesting when you're talking about Casa, because I had Nick on, I don't know, it's probably about a month ago.
Yeah, I saw that.
We're talking you through a similar thing. Yeah, so he's awesome. And like, I really, really like what Casa are doing, again, because it's that middle ground, because I think multi-sig is the future, although I haven't sorted out my own self-sovereign one. I've done the Casa one, and I followed their guide to make sure that I did it as anonymously as I could and did it the best way I could. And it's a great service, and it's easy because you don't have to write down those 24 words. And I've onboarded a friend of mine onto it recently who's fairly techie, but not that techie. And he flew straight through it. There was no problems. You don't have to write anything down. And you save, what is it, the derivation paths or whatever it is.
Yeah, the self-sovereign recovery info. You can printed out or something.
Yeah, that's it. And so it is a more simple and more slick system. And then because otherwise you have these 24 words, and like you say, the stupid thing to do is just write them down on a post-it note and leave it somewhere. That's the sort of best thing you can do is to stamp it into steel and either split it and have a recovery word and have it in different locations or backups and stuff. But not everyone can do that, or not everyone can be bothered to do that, and it doesn't feel, it's not exactly slick. It's like getting a lump of metal and a lump hammer and stamping it in and putting it in different locations is
You're
like,
literally going to like the Stone Ages.
yeah, exactly. So can you tell me, with the foundation devices, if someone was to use that in a multi-sig setup,
Yeah.
are you doing this in a similar way? And if it's in a single sig setup, where are you storing this information? Is it going on an SD card, or how are you going about doing that?
Yeah, so we have a couple different options at setup, and we're still working on perfecting the UI flows there because it's kind of challenging to get right. So option one is you just write down the words, right? Because we always have to offer that as an option to users, especially Bitcoiners that know what they're doing. Uh, Option two
Hmm.
is that you're backing it up to a micro SD card. What it's actually doing is it's storing the seed and some other information on the micro SD card, but then you do have to record down the encryption key for that SD card, like a password. So you still have to write something down, but you can be much more, I guess, much less careful about how you're storing the password to the SD card. You could store it, for example, on the cloud. You could store it still on paper. You could store it in a password manager, because if someone finds that password, they still need the physical SD card as well. And so I would argue that that's
Hmm.
more secure than paper. Though there's obvious concerns with what happens if the SD card is damaged, or if it just the flash storage degrades over time. So we do bundle in 2 industrial grade micro SD cards with Passport so that you can
Hmm.
use them for backup. They're rated to be much longer lasting and much more durable than existing cards. But I
Hmm.
think that's what we're going to push users to, for like who are totally like new users. And then there's also the option, if you're using it with multi-sig, to not write it down. And as of right now, we're kind of prefacing that option in the UX flow. We're saying like, are you sure? Please confirm that you're using it with multi-sig. I think
Hmm.
hopefully we can work with Casa and others down the line where, depending on the software wallet or service that you're pairing with Passport, it can automatically take you through that flow. So for example, if we were to work with Casa, and you told Passport as you're setting it up that you're using it with Casa, it can automatically make that decision for you and then not require you to back up the 24 words. So that's how we're approaching it right now, pushing new users to do the micro SD backup, leaving the 24 words as an option for people who know what they're doing, and then also allowing you to skip it. Because I've set up
Hmm.
Casa before, and most hardware wallets, I think maybe all hardware wallets, require that you write the words down because there's a verification step afterwards. So
Yeah.
the most, I think, honestly, more terrifying than writing down your seed is writing down your seed and then immediately destroying it. Because you're like, how do I destroy it? Do I burn it? Do I shred it? Do I put it
Mm.
into boiling water with a cleaning solution in it and let the ink dissolve off I'm not even kidding, I did that. So
Mm.
then do I take that paper and throw it down the garbage disposal? Like uh, that's what Casa users have to deal with now. And so we want to make sure that, like, look, if you're
Yeah.
using a service like Casa that's helping walk you through it, you're using a 2 of 3 or a 3 of 5, then you shouldn't have to write the words down and then destroy them afterwards. That's just really, really bad UX, and honestly opens you up potentially to more attack vectors than it would to just keeping the seed on the device.
Yeah, it makes sense. And I like having these micro SDs. I like having them encrypted and having the password because, like you say, you have to have not only the physical chip, but you also need to have the password. And that's what I've done with my cold card, and just had multiple backups just in case there's something goes wrong with them, with industrial grade and all of that sort of stuff. And it works really nicely. It is cleaner. And also you can hide that much easier than you can hide a stamped metal
Definitely.
plate.
Definitely.
It is easier. And presumably you have a similar setup where you say you have the two, so you do it would encrypt one, and then you just press, copy, like a second copy or something, and you can do as many as you feel
Yeah,
comfortable
so you
doing,
can
I'm
create
guessing.
new backups. It's just the same way Cold Card does it. That we may use a smaller number of words. We may do like 6 instead of 12, for example. We're working on trying to figure out the
Mhm.
best balance between sufficient security and UX. But yeah, also the nice thing about the SD card backup is that it can save your settings on the device, and it can also save your multi-sig quorums that you may have imported. And that's really helpful because, yeah, I mean, if you're just using it to back up the seed and you put them away, that's totally fine. That's great. Not a huge deal to restore those settings later on. But yes, you can also update or create a new backup at any time. And, we have the SD card right on micro SD card slot right on top of the device. Really easy to just, plug an SD card in there and load it up with whatever data you need on it. And so, we also just thought it was important to bundle in the cards. So we, as I mentioned, we bundle two. And then we also give you a nice little jewel case for each card so that it's not like freestanding, like a little plastic case for it. Because once again, we want to make the best decisions on behalf of our users. So rather than telling our
Mhm.
users, oh, go buy an SD card if you want to use this feature, we're saying this is a useful feature. Here's two industrial grade cards that come from a reputable manufacturer that we've tested and we formatted for you. You can obviously bring your own, but it's important, I think, that if we're asking users to employ such a feature, that we're then also giving them the tools that they need to do it.
Hmm. Yeah, it all sounds good. It sounds like the way I think we need to be moving towards, and it's great to have these different options. And like I said before, although I want to set up Spectre multi-sig. Um, I haven't got to that stage yet, but I do see this is the way it's going to go. And to have multiple devices that are all pushing forward and having different options, and they all have different trade-offs, is important, because the more devices we have, then the more of an attack, or less of an attack vector we have. Because if, say, there's a vulnerability in one, but you're in a 3 of 5, then at least it's only one, and you're safe with the others. So the more I think about it, it does make sense to go that way going forward.
Mm-hmm. And my dream setup actually is, and the way I think we're going to move in the future, or at least we at Foundation Devices are going to try to move the industry in terms of our product roadmap, is to turn every device into a hardware wallet. I think when we say hardware wallet now, I don't know if that's the best term for it, because it can mean a lot
Mm.
of different things. It can mean and also confuses new users because they think it's actually like storing their Bitcoin, and they're like using it to transact.
Yeah, is
Uh,
my Bitcoin in there? I can't see it.
exactly. So I think something like a signing device or something like that is probably a better term. But there's a whole spectrum.
Mm,
You can go with something like Cold Card, where you can use it completely air gapped. You
mm,
could go for a Ledger Nano X, where you can use it with Bluetooth. You can go for that new Blockstream Jade product where it even has Wi-Fi on it. It's like, how do you call all these things hardware wallets, right? They all have completely different security models, and you interact with them in different ways. What if you were to put a hardware wallet into a Bitcoin full node? So it's now
mm,
internet connected, right? And it's able to communicate with the node software, and you can use it to store your seed for Bitcoin or Lightning transactions more securely. So it's not an air gapped or a cold storage hardware wallet, but you could also kind of like isolate it from the main electronics to give it a little bit more security. So is that more like warm storage? Is that cold storage? You see what I'm saying? There's a whole spectrum of what you can
mhm.
do. And so the way that we look at it is we think that all your devices are going to be storing keys, whether it's a phone, a node, a computer, an air-gapped, offline hardware wallet, so on. And we think that multi-sig is going to be prevalent. And we think that for new users, it's just going to require them going to different devices to quickly approve the transaction. And that's very similar, I think, in UX to what, Apple users are used to. If you, for example, set up that new iPhone and you add it to your iCloud account, you get a push notification on all your Apple devices saying, do you want to, authorize this new iPhone at this location? Now, obviously, I don't know if we can ever do anything that slick without using some kind of, centralized provider, because, you really need to use, when you're cycling a device into a new multi-sig setup, you have to like update the configuration on each device. So it's not going to be as smooth, but I just think the general idea of being able to approve a new device from your existing device, or go to another device for like a second factor, authentication approval, is something that people are already used to. So if we can build out a UX and try to make it as easy as possible, where you want to send a Bitcoin transaction, you fingerprint or Face ID on your phone, you scan a QR code from your hardware wallet, done. Or you can, up it to a 3 or 5 multi-sig, and maybe you also scan a QR code on your node that's sitting on your desk. So there's those kinds of things that you can do. And I think people get that more intuitively, that you're just approving it from your different devices, and that even if you lose a couple of your devices, it doesn't impact you at all.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I very much look forward to seeing multi-sig become easier and easier. And, it is very easy with someone like Casa. And I hear that Spectre's doing some great things, and Blue Wallet, and this kind of stuff.
Spectre's really good too.
Yeah, Spectre's awesome. And I had Ben on here recently. He's an absolute dude. He's just like he's one of the guys who's on Twitter, always putting out some memes and fucking around, but then also gets stuff done.
He's done a good job on Twitter with the memes lately.
he's on fire, that bloke. He's very funny. So yeah, I do see that this is the way forward, and it is exciting, because I think for a lot of people, and certainly for me, my big fear very early was like, oh, well, if I take custody of all this stuff, what if someone comes to my house and puts a gun to my head? What am I going to do? And, there is that $5 wrench attack concern. And once you learn to do things properly, you can get around that. But it is a big concern for people, and multi-sig really helps solve that, really helps take away that worry, which is a big one, and it should be. So especially with these ledger leaks and all this kind of stuff, like, it is a real serious concern. And if you have things set up properly with multi-sig, I think that really gets around it. So that's going to help onboard more people. Devices that are easy to use and slick to use are going to help onboard more people. So it'd be interesting to hear from you, like, if, and it seems like we are going to get there, what do you think the world's going to look like in the next 5 to 10 years when you're planning out what foundation devices are going to do? And how do you see Bitcoin changing things?
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned, Bitcoin really fixes the incentives around open hardware. What we really hope to accomplish over the next 5 to 10 years is to offer a real alternative to the existing kind of mobile and desktop duopolies that we have. Offer an alternative to the Apple and Google duopoly on mobile. We really, really want to be able to introduce our own smartphone, and also offer an alternative to, really, it's like an Apple, Microsoft duopoly on desktop. I know there are people who use Linux, and I know obviously how popular it is, but for the vast majority of consumers, it's just not an option right now. And so that's really what we're aiming for in this decade. And so what that means is, it means changing up a lot of the models that are used to do things like store data or to authenticate users. For example, we want to see users storing their own data. We don't ever want to have to run like an equivalent of iCloud. We think that's crazy. We don't want to store user data. We think we need to give users the tools to store their data themselves. We don't want to be collecting information about our customers. We want to be able to purge the information as soon as we have it. We don't want to have credit card numbers or other things like that. We ideally don't even want to have an email address, except unfortunately, we use that now to communicate, company updates and important security updates. We want to see private keys, hopefully through something Bitcoin or Lightning related, replace emails and passwords, for authentication. And I think like there's so many amazing applications that can be developed that are Bitcoin centric and have radically different business models as soon as consumers are no longer stuck in like the Apple, Google world. So for example, I'm sure you're probably familiar with what Sphinx is doing, with like the tipping for podcasts.
Yeah, I'm trying to get Paul on actually. I spoke to him the other day, and
Cool.
What he's building is just like I'm so excited about what the possibilities are there. Yeah, so I am.
Yeah.
Very
So,
very excited.
Based on my understanding of the rules, that's not an application that's going to be allowed to be distributed on the Apple, iOS App Store, because you're not using Apple for the payments. So obviously, I have it on my phone in
Yeah.
beta on the test flight service, but this is a perfect example. You have all these like crazy smart developers that are putting together these, it's early, but they're laying the building blocks for this whole Bitcoin centric economy that operates in a very different way than how our traditional app business models or podcast business models or media business models operate. The idea that you can be streaming payments to someone is unbelievable. And so that stuff's just not going to be allowed to be successful on the existing mobile platforms. And so we're really hoping that we can have an impact here, that we can put out a suite of products that are going to provide, UXs that are on par with what Apple and Android can do, but that are actually open source, sovereign, provide total freedom and privacy to our users. And so that's really the goal for the decade.
It's two different worlds, isn't it? I don't know how else to put it than you've got Bitcoin world, and you've got things like Sphinx, and you've got all these amazing things happening, and you've got Lightning and the ability to stream money, and you've got self-sovereignty, and you've got this cypherpunk ethos, and taking back control. And then you've got the old world, which is fucked. It's on fire. It's not something like any of us really want to be involved in, but we still kind of have to be involved with it to some extent still now. But to have dedicated hardware which allows us to use those products, all this software is moving really, really fast, would be amazing. Like you said, to be able to interact with these things that are inevitably going to be banned by Apple and everybody else, because it's too good. Like it competes with them, and they know they're not going to keep up in the end. So it's too much freedom, and it's in this weird space now where you're right. Like you have to use generally Google or iPhone. You have to use Windows or Mac, and yes, you can use Linux and Pop OS and these other things, but most people won't. So just being able to have that whole ecosystem workable for somebody where they don't actually have to step back into the other world would be really nice. You're talking about Open Bazaar and the ability to trade on there, and all these things where we're pretty much there. It feels it's just not quite usable for most people, and it's exciting to see what's going to happen and whether this is going to be possible and how quickly.
I don't know if it's amusing or kind of funny, is that I feel like we as a company should not have to do this. We unfortunately are having to take a step back significantly in terms of technology, in terms of hardware, in order to deliver this kind of open, more trustable, privacy preserving, sovereign hardware. The entire hardware world, like all the building blocks are so opaque. you have no idea
Mhm.
what's going on inside of any chip that's in your device. It's just a
Mhm.
complete black box. And there's so many documented issues with Intel, for example, of having these all these hidden features in the chip that are non-active that end up being discovered by security researchers or hackers, then being exploited. Most people don't realize the security chip in every modern Mac before these new series of Macs that have the Apple Silicon processor, but the T2 coprocessor that's been in the Macs for the last few years, they're all completely owned. You can plug in with
Mhm.
a Thunderbolt cable, and you can immediately gain root access to that device and bypass the encryption. And it's just like we're building this entire hardware ecosystem, or I guess not we as a company, but the whole hardware industry for the last couple of decades has been building on layers and layers of proprietary tech to the point where you really cannot trust what's going on in any device that you're using. So that's why it's like really exciting to see things like it's that Bunny's project Precursor had been floating around the Bitcoin space recently, where he's trying to design like a completely trustable and open hardware device from the ground up. I think that's going to take a few years to get to the point where it can be usable by normal people. But it's why it's why our device has a physical keypad instead of a touchscreen, because
Mhm.
touchscreens have embedded chips in them running unknown firmware. It's why we use this black and white display that from Sharp, because the display actually is one of the only displays you can buy on the market that does not have a chip inside of it running unknown firmware. And it's more tamper evident. The circuitry is etched into glass. We probably should have used lithium ion batteries, even though most of them also have chips in them. We decided to do AAA, for a couple different reasons. We'll probably do lithium ion on the next version of the device. But like the fact that your battery now has chips in it,
Mhm.
it's kind of insane. And then the fact that too that Apple went from maybe I guess almost 40 years ago now, running the 1984 famous commercial about how essentially buy a Macintosh in 1984, the actual year 1984 won't be like the book 1984, that it's going to
Oh, is that in
magically.
their marketing?
That was their most famous ad ever. That's actually my
Oh,
favorite
really?
advertisement, the 1984 ad. Yeah, that
I
was when
didn't
they
know that.
released the Macintosh. Yeah, it's a fantastic ad. And the fact that now 40 years later we're at the point where your Mac is actually communicating to a central server owned by Apple.
Mm.
You're not allowed to downgrade the operating system on the new Macs. You can't even downgrade to a previous version of the operating system because they blacklist each version every time they release a new update. They actually bypass the most VPN clients. So Apple services on your computer do not have to go through VPN. There's been so much stuff that's been coming out just this year alone. And it's like you don't have to do that. Like if someone at Apple wanted to make this type of hardware, they could. And the crazy thing is that we're having to take like a large step back in terms of tech in order to provide this more open, trustable hardware, because these companies refuse to do it for whatever reason. Apple wants that ultra control, and Google obviously wants to surveil their users. And
Mm.
so from a pure technology perspective, there's no reason why these companies can't release this stuff as open, and why they can't provide this great, sovereign hardware to users. It's just every fiber in their being refuses to do so. And so it's kind of like a shame. I would almost be like, part of me wants to be working on next gen technology type things like AR, VR, nuclear reactors, like
Mhm.
hard tech that has not been solved yet. Instead, we're having to essentially rebuild, this consumer hardware from scratch because the existing companies won't do it. It's kind of amusing, and it's also kind of sad.
Yeah. And I guess it's kind of similar to Bitcoin in that way, like in terms of
Oh, that's true.
we've had to start from absolute scratch, scrap everything, start something completely new, something logical, something that works, and then we layer on top of it once everything is secure and move slowly because you can't afford to fuck it up. You have one shot, you fuck this up, we're done. And that, I guess, is maybe going to just take a little bit longer with the hardware as well. And like you're saying, you're going to have to be very thoughtful about what chips and how, even down to the batteries, like you're saying, and all this stuff. But I guess if we can keep things open source, and that is one thing that I'm really appreciating about the way that you guys are doing things, keeping things open source, allowing people to see how you build the hardware and all this kind of thing, the more people can build on top of it. And I kind of see all of this maybe playing out in a similar way to Bitcoin, in terms of you have these different stacks, you have Lightning on top of Bitcoin, you have maybe other things on top of Lightning, and maybe it's going to be the same with this hardware. And once we get over that initial stage, things can actually move very, very fast, but it's just going to take a few years to get that base layer, that foundation in, and from there things can explode.
Yeah, and it's amazing, I think, how far the industry has come in recognizing the importance of open source. Like we were able to raise some pre-seed money from angel investors and some small funds. No, with them knowing that everything that we make is just being open sourced. Like if you tried to do that 10 years ago, they'd be like, wait, so we're giving you money and then you're going to take the money, you're going to make stuff, and then you're going to open source it. Like, what are you talking about? Right. And so we've come a long way, I think, as an industry. And yeah, like everything we do as a company is open source. The software side, the firmware running on the device, and then also the hardware side. And as hopefully we'll be successful with Passport, our first product, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to release more devices. And as we release more devices, they're going to become more and more complex. They're going to be more expensive to make. They're going to have more capabilities. And we're going to continue open sourcing all of that. And then, my co-founder, Matt, for example, he's an analog chip designer. He was at Intel for a few years working on their next gen PCI Express technology. As soon as we have the opportunity to make chips, we're going to also open source that as best as we can, because it can be difficult working with some of these foundries. And so we're basically saying, you buy our hardware, we'll try to give you really, really great hardware. It's going to be open source, and then everything we do is going to be open source, so that if you as another individual or as a company want to take any of our work and build on top of it, you are more than welcome to do so, and you do not need our permission. And on the software side, we're predominantly relying on the GPL license, which is like a viral copyleft license, meaning that anyone's welcome to use our stuff, but they also have to open source their stuff. And we're doing the same thing on the hardware side. So we're actually using a license by CERN, like the science organization in Switzerland, the one that makes like the particle colliders. So they have this great open hardware license, and we're using that. So, sure, you're totally welcome to use our hardware designs. You just also have to open source your hardware designs. And that's how you really progress an industry rapidly, because if everyone is building on top of each other's work and everyone is grabbing the best things from their respective projects, then you can build really fast. And maybe we can get there faster than by the end of this decade. I don't know. But I think this is definitely going to be an awesome decade.
I agree. Well, listen, it's been amazing learning a little bit more about the device. I can't wait to have one in my hands. I know that it's not quite there yet. Could you tell me when you're expecting to have these on the market, when someone can actually purchase one of these? And
Sure.
I think I saw that the first lot will only be limited to 1,000. Is that right?
Exactly. So
Okay.
we've had pre-orders for a little bit now, for our first batch of 1,000 Founders Edition Passport devices, and they're totally cancelable. So if you make a pre-order and decide you change your mind for whatever reason, we refund you before we ship. But we're getting really close to manufacturing and shipping. So we're actually manufacturing this month. It's really exciting as all the components are arriving, every day as we speak at our manufacturer that we're working with in the New England area in the US. And I wanna ship by end of this month, but I think we're most likely going to be shipping early in February. So we're getting pretty close. Our promised estimated like guaranteed ship date has always been March 31st. So we've always been aiming to beat that date. The hardware design is done. We passed the regulatory testing a couple weeks ago, which is exciting. And we are just working on firmware refinements right now. And we're going to be working on that, for the next few weeks. So it's going to be us timing it based on, as we're assembling the devices later this month, and as we're perfecting and finalizing the firmware, we'll obviously load the firmware onto the device and then start shipping. And we have sent out a few preview units. So Bitvolt did a video with a preview unit a week ago. Bitcoin Magazine had the first unboxing video with the preview device. When we did Stefan Livera's podcast a few weeks back, he did have his hands on a device beforehand before we recorded with him. And our goal is gonna be to get a lot more preview devices out later this month and early next month, so that before you buy, you can really see how it works and get a thumbs up from other Bitcoiners that are trying it out. So that's where we are right now. And then Passport sells for $299 US and is on our website at foundationdevices.com.
Cool. Well, yeah, I very much look forward to getting one in my hands and seeing all of these videos. And yeah, it's exciting to hear that the way that you're looking to take this company and go for hardware, not just for signing devices, but also for maybe eventually laptops and phones. And I really look forward to seeing how this progresses, and would love to have you on again when you have some more products on or after its launch. But for now, is there anything that we haven't covered that you wanted to?
No, this has been really great. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll definitely be down to come back on as we have more products and more announcements in the future.
Brilliant. All right. Well, yeah, thanks so much for coming on. If you ever find yourself in London, give me a shout. I'd love to bring you out for a beer or something. And yeah, really excited to see what happens. So thanks again, and we'll speak soon.